Final Fantasy is one of the most recognizable video game titles in history. 16 entries to the main series and countless side games. I mean, you can count them, but there is just so many of them. Those games were always thought as good and of high quality with great storylines. I thought exactly the same even if I played only a few of them. I still was of a high opinion of any of them, even when they played not exactly to my liking. This time around I am mostly disappointed by what was delivered in 16th main title. I don't know how this could happen, but almost all elements of this game are flawed to the core. This time I will cut the intro short and get to the chase. The good beginnings of bad is what happened here, as my first impressions were very positive. Final Fantasy always had some of the best stories in the industry, but what I witnessed here almost from the start was amazing. Developers held no punches back. It was like watching the good seasons of the Game of Thrones. Just wow, I thought to myself. What felt like a full-length movie was only the intro to the game, holy cow. I really forgot how good were those games, and when it comes to the cinematic storytelling quality. But when the first warm feelings and hours came down, I was left kinda confused. In first several hours of the game I didn't know what icons really were, in which forms do they manifest, who is controlling the body in each form, and if more people do have fractions of their powers. So many questions, so much confusion and no answers. I'm not gonna expose the whole premise on which the game's story is built. Let's just say it aspires to be an epic hero tale in fantasy world, and you know the gist of it. Main story surrounds the ultimate truths of the world, but it does it in so convoluted and overworded ways that without many years of educations in psychology, anthropology and history, not many will understand what writers had in mind. I for once can see clearly what they went for, but ultimately they failed, because they have not kept it simple. Even the wording is unnecessarily rich with obscure words that not many people would know or remember. I guess the ambition of writers was their downfall in this case, which is quite ironic when they tried to convey just that in the story told in Final Fantasy XVI. What kept me playing was a mystery behind some events and characters. Someone planned it very well to hook you in and keep you playing just to know how it will all evolve and resolve in the end. Brilliantly done in that regard, at least the ending was decent enough, so I was not utterly disappointed. Side quests are simple fetch and kill, with nothing to twist your panties, but they are still worth doing because NPCs will hash out the game world more for you in the dialogues. Moreover, you're gonna get powerful upgrades as well, so it's worth doing them, even if they are not the most exciting thing to do. It kinda felt like playing MMORPG at times, but with most of the modern RPGs, so there's that. When it comes to the lore of presented world, icons are double-edged swords, as they destroy both enemies and allies. They are essentially powerful beings bigger than life that can be only challenged by their brethren, so many battles end in impasse cause of that reason alone. However, writers made a grave mistake in presentation of political and geographical spectrum. I could never remember which kingdom was which, so I was mostly confused when hearing about all the war efforts and conflicts between the nations. Before the game was over I could characterize most of them, but not all. On the bright side, and what reminded me of before mentioned Game of Thrones, were some very brutal scenes. I like it cause it's making things more interesting and somewhat realistic, even in fantasy setting. But why the hell in modern game writers keep insisting on putting in word cancer into the dialogues? I know the word has ancient history and many different meanings and connotations throughout the ages, but still, in modern times it has really bad ring to it, because of its often misuse. I would rather see the word plague or disease used instead, or almost any other word that would convey the meaning of a phrase. Tell me if I'm alone in that regard or I'm onto something. Also, there are plenty of logical errors, the biggest one being that people around the realm do not recognize the scar that indicates the removal of the bearer's mask. I mean, who thought we would believe something so far-fetched? Overall, I am not happy with writing. I remember Final Fantasy games being way better than that. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but I do not think so. Here most of the text feels uninspired and copy-pasted. My biggest problem with the whole thing is that it all sounds like a wish of what good people should say and do, but it doesn't ring true whatsoever, and if it doesn't feel right, it ain't right. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it was all for nothing. Oh wait, I forgot one thing they done right. For the first time in games that I have played, they've presented gay characters without making a circus out of it. They felt to me same as straight characters, there was nothing weird or cringe about it. It was pleasantly surprising, that's all I'm going to say about that. There is another one big positive aspect of the story presented here, and somewhat partly redeeming quality of writing, how the cast of main characters treat each other with love and care. I am all for that, even if it's idealistic and not realistic. It is fantasy after all, for the love of everything that is good. All in all, I think story presented in Final Fantasy XVI and the quality of writing overall could be much better. And I expected much better. So how about gameplay, huh? Some time ago Final Fantasy went from turn-based combat to the action one. This is a sign of our times, but I really do miss turn-based mode because it was always very good in Square Enix games. Oh, the glorious Final Fantasy Tactics on the first PlayStation console. It was so good I could play it for the rest of my days. Fortunately, action combat in 16 is good enough, nicely done when it comes to difficulty level. You set one of two in the menu, story or action, and then you decide which accessories to use. You got a set of them that help you with automating or easing up mechanics like combos, evasions, and healing. However, you gotta sacrifice accessory slot that could be used to increase your power level otherwise. I use combo ring, cause I'm a boomer and I do not feel like masterfully doing attacks and abilities. But I can evade and heal myself. Nicely done, as you can customize your own combat experience. I played Elden Ring with sword and board build with summons. So I'm not gonna try hard just to feel better about my skills, which won't improve but will go down with time. And that's life for you folks. I almost forgot, I started on action mode and then changed to story. Not to make battles easier but shorter, because some irrelevant fights with tougher mobs were taking way too long for my liking. I have some gripes with combat though. It is so visually dynamic and flashy that some of the time I had no idea what's going on and if to dodge or not. And dodging itself doesn't animation cancel most stuff, so that's no ideal either. Main boss fights can sometimes take dozens and dozens of minutes without autosave, so if you are forced to end gaming session, you're gonna need to repeat it from the start. That sucks big time for people like me that try to insert short gaming sessions here and there between all the live activities. In times like this, I wish I was a professional YouTuber so I can go for as long as it's needed. But that's not gonna happen anytime soon, and if I was to predict for future, it will never happen. In other news, some enemies have very fun attack patterns. I mean, it's not on Elden Ring level, but it can be very good nonetheless. Outside of combat there is not much to do other than traversing and watching cutscenes. At the beginning of the game I felt like watching a movie, very little gameplay. Good thing those cutscenes were very good, or I would be mad as hell. Still, it can deter gameplay-oriented players very easily, so that's not ideal. So far game seems like a mix of good and bad, but nothing that would scare away interested players and fans. Yeah, here is the kicker, the technical state of the game after many major patches, so I do not think it will get much better anytime soon, if ever. Hear me out, as it is something that must be said and listened to. Overall game looks very good, as was always the case with Final Fantasy series. We can nitpick about some details here and there, which I might do, but the aesthetics of the game are very pleasing to the eye. Speaking of which, finally a game where the HDR that I calibrated looks better than SDR that I also calibrated myself on my recently acquired OLED monitor. I started to think that HDR was some kind of massive scam, but it seems like it's a matter of mastering and implementation. But it ain't all rainbows and sunshines visually, as there is heavy ghosting when using FSR3. It is mostly visible in slower cutscenes, and you most definitely not gonna notice it in face-to-face combat, but there are also some scenes where fast-moving objects ghost like hell. First example was when the heavy storm was hitting forests and fields. It looked terrible. Unfortunately, other upsampling methods had their own drawbacks. I stick with FSR3 because it was most sharp, and I hate blurry image more than ghosting. I hope DLSS users had better experience. By the way, native pictures sucks too, with its terrible implementation of TAA. I decided to do what I do rarely, and that is to mod the game. I downloaded and installed OptiScaler to mod it to use FSR4. It was even worse, so I changed back to FSR3 in mod menu, and it seems like the ghosting mostly stopped, which was odd. Maybe OptiScaler's FSR3 version was better than the one the game's natively used, and changing all the way down to FSR2 reduced ghosting even more. But then I tried XeSS with inputs of FSR, and it was again slightly better. At the end, to turn back to FSR4 to find out that in most scenes it was again better. Game rendering is a real mess. I wish it was better, but it is what it is. Next thing I modded were in-game cutscenes, so they were no longer locked to 30 FPS. I understand pre-render ones, but most of those rendered in real time had awful filter on them and that pesky 30 FPS lock. I don't understand why do such a thing to good-looking scenes. Most likely it was done to blur the lines between pre-rendered cinematics and in-game cutscenes, or just for an artistic vision, I don't know. Whatever the reason, I made my choice and set it my way. But I know it is a small percentage of players that do mod games. I really do not like modding games, I rather experience them as they were created and intended, but sometimes I need to overcome shortcomings of the games I really wanna play by modding them, because the annoyance is so great that alternative would be only uninstalling. Another gripe I have with visuals is that instead of blacks, we got black and grey heavy grain filter. I don't know who thought it was a good idea, but it looks blasphemous on a good screen. Another thing would be mostly visible in dense open areas with trees and whatnot. Levels of details are not properly coded, which leads to visible too close pop-ins and even level of details glitches. On the plus side, camera work in cutscenes is very good and cinematic, as it is in the most epic boss fights. Overall performance of the game is fine some of the time, but it scales down poorly, so you're gonna need a fairly decent rig to play it in decent frame times. Since the difference was very little between quality settings, I kept it on FSR quality mode with everything maxed out for visual pleasantness. Still, in some areas 8-core CPU is almost maxed out and performance drops in the way you can feel it extensively. So I did what I thought I would never do, but here we are. I used frame generation. But wait! Built-in engine FSR frame generation made the game less fluid, so in the direct opposite of the intended effect. However, in AMD Adrenalin software, there is a toggle for fluid frames generation, which works outside of engine, and it worked like a charm in this particular title. There were some glitches mostly visible in static text on the screen, but it did not bother me as much as choppy frame rates and stutters. This is a great use case for frame generation where we are limited by CPU or game engine itself. When it comes to the audio side of the game, maximum volume could be louder, that's my only minor gripe. Voice actors do a very good job, as we can recognize many familiar voices. There is like a cast of best VO artists, if I am not mistaken. Sid we heard many times. I mostly remember him from Wolsen, where he did fantastic job as well. Others I cannot pinpoint, but still they sound very familiar. Great job everyone. Music is very good overall, but some of the tracks really do not fit what's going on the screen. At least, not in my mind. Maybe some people find it very attractive. Prime example, Fight with Titan Lost, where instead of epic instrumental, I got not very good in my opinion electronic piece of music. In other technical aspects, game has ultra fast loading times. I was shocked for an around 150 GB large game to do that is so impressive as hell. It felt instantaneous. However, there is a very dark side to the game's technical state. Number of freezes and crashes 11. I nerfed and capped my PC's max capabilities in order to mitigate the crashes. It helped greatly as the crashes stopped and in their place I got mega stutters every few hours. At least I have learned that I can run my new 9070 XT graphics card at 95% performance with a savings of 100 watts, and that's sweet. And that my new RAM kit had to be tuned to lower speed with tighter timings in order to be completely stable. The game is very sensitive to any instabilities and will scare you with system freezes, crashes, or even resets, as it invokes transient power spikes that will trigger your power supply's unit failsafes. I really expected better quality on the PC version of the game, taking into account Final Fantasy XIV ongoing development and great ports of Final Fantasy VII remakes, or whatever they're called. Disappointing to say the least. I have read that brand new engine was used for this game. I guess they need to learn to use it way better or abandon it completely, cause in its current state it is barely usable. I don't remember the last time I had so much problem with one game. So there are also 2 DLC packs for the game. Echoes of the Fallen was very short with wonderful colors and graphics. Voice acting however was one level below main game. The Rising Tides improves on graphical presentation as well. I wonder why we could not have similar level throughout the whole game time. Oh well. Base game took 63 hours to finish, including all the side missions. With additional DLC in form of 2 small expansion packs, it was overall 71 hours. Time to summarize all my thoughts about the Final Fantasy XVI. First of all, this game is a wet dream for all the fans of Dragon Ball and Zodiac Knights anime, as its combat and cinematics are done in that style, and no one can convince me otherwise. Other than combat, it all plays like watching a very long TV series, but not of the highest flies. I would say it is not the Game of Thrones overall, as I thought at the beginning, but rather some Asian telenovela. It's not the worst thing you can do with your spare time, but it's far from the best. I guess it provided me comfort of something familiar when I was transitioning to the new line of work recently. Maybe that's why I played it for so long despite all the flaws. It reminded me World of Warcraft in that regard. I think I compare games too often, whatever. All I'm saying is that Final Fantasy XVI is not the best game that you can play. It is barely worth the name that it was given. I am very disappointed it all turned out like that, but maybe it will be the learning experience, as I heard the game did not sell very well. I can only recommend the game to the die-hard fans of the series that played all other entries already, because if you had many years break from Final Fantasy, I recommend that you don't play this one, but instead play some older ones or just wait for the next entry and watch reviews to see if it will be any better. On that somehow and somewhat sour note, I will leave you until the next Great Late Review.